Managing carbon emissions in the transportation industry is the topic of my conversation today with Josh Bouk. He is president of Trax Technologies. Hi, Josh.
Hey, thanks for having me, Bob.
And thanks for being with me. So how is data today key in measuring and controlling and managing carbon emissions in the transportation chain?
Well, I think first we want to step back and we want to look at what is the problem at all.
Sure.
So for the last 170 years, since 1850, carbon emissions have grown 4.5 times as fast as the rate of inflation.
Wow.
Across that entire period. So we're now at 16,300 times as much carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions as we had back in 1850. That's created a completely unsustainable climate. We see that with how investors are treating companies now, how consumers are treating companies, and where they put their share of wallet. Mm-hmm. And now the SEC is getting involved to start to say, look, we're going to have to measure these things. We're going to have to report consistently. And so I think for an organization, enterprise just getting started, they need to start at the leadership level, understanding who's going to be responsible in the organization for driving carbon emissions efficiency. Mm-hmm. And then they need to start putting in place processes and practices, tools to be able to go get data for scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions, because that's what the SEC is going to require of us.
Might those answers be unique or at least unusual to the company in question? I mean, there's no one answer as to who within an organization actually has that responsibility and what exactly you do. Does that differ from company to company?
That's right. I mean, supply chain, we're here at CSCMP, and,
sure.
And supply chain is the dominant source of emissions globally. Mm-hmm. So it is naturally your chief supply chain officer combined with your chief sustainability officer. But those two combined, now with the need for the CEO and the CFO to sign off on emissions data that's going to need to be published, is going to create a C-suite
responsibility. Does that mean a C in the title of the person doing, like Chief Sustainability Officer or something like that?
I think it has to be, yeah, just to set the right tone.
Okay, now you mentioned scope 3. Scope 1 is your own direct emissions. Scope 2 is the energy purchases. Scope 3 are the bulk of your emissions come from your supply chain partners over whom you have no direct control.
That's right.
How do you even begin to get your arms around that when you have multiple supply chain partners extending, in some cases, over thousands of miles, multiple factories, multiple modes of transportation? It's got to be a huge challenge.
It's a massive challenge because you're right. None of those companies calculate emissions the same way. Mm-hmm. None of them share the same data with you. And so you're left with a mass of vendors who you're asking for data and trying to harmonize that data to be able to create transparency in your scope 3 emissions. Mm-hmm. It's what most enterprises are struggling the most with right now.
Okay, so what about the role of carbon offsets or carbon credits? How can they help in reducing carbon emissions?
Well, in the short term, carbon offsets or carbon credits can be purchased to be a Band-Aid. Yeah, but because it's so hard to measure accurately. But as you start to measure more accurately, as you start to have the data, collect the data and analyze that, now we can start taking on projects to drive down emissions. Carbon credits are taking advantage of somebody else's good work.
Right.
But what we really want to see is we want to see enterprises driving down their own emissions through projects and work with their partners to really improve the globe without having to buy somebody else's progress.
Mm-hmm. Should everybody have like a real stretch goal and that we need to be like net neutral in terms of carbon emissions by X year or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, the experts would tell you 2040 is a have to have if we want sustainability within our planet. I'm not a scientist, but I would say that most of other enterprises that we work with as our customers are looking at the 2030 to 2050 period as have to be carbon neutral.
So carbon offsets, carbon credits, a Band-Aid. Beyond the Band-Aid, then it's about data. It's about how do you get that data from those supply chain partners?
That's exactly right.
How do you get those data from the supply chain partners?
I mean, so in transportation, we have to care about vehicle type, we have to care about fuel type,
right.
We have to care about all the things that are happening in that supply chain during, or in that move while that product is going from A to B, whether it's sitting on a tarmac for 3 hours burning fuel, all these different elements, whether it's cold chain, whether there's dry ice that's being used to keep it cold, all of these different data points. We see a lot of different systems in play there. We see third-party systems, we see platforms like Project 44, and we see platforms like ours and others that are aggregating data to be able to provide that consistent visibility.
Yeah, and once you're doing that too, I would imagine you would want to build into your contracts with suppliers and service providers that they have to follow certain guidelines from their own carbon emissions in order to do business with you in the first place.
That's exactly right. So I love that part of it. It's operationalizing the data, right?
Right.
There's a certain amount of data that's going to go upstream to the C-suite to be able to publish in our ESG reports. But downstream to the people who are actually making decisions day to day, moment by moment on how to move product, we need them to be able to not just make decisions on service quality and cost, which is how they've historically decided how to ship, but now it's service quality, cost, and sustainability, or carbon emissions. And by adding that third pillar, the third leg of the stool, if you will, now we've got a great blend of decision criteria to help us save our planet while saving money.
So a serious commitment is needed, backed by data and cooperation with all of those customers, and then that platform under overseeing the whole thing where that data is shared. That's a fantastic insight. Thanks so much, Josh, for your insights on that. But I would like to ask you very quickly a little bit about Trax Technologies specifically.
Sure.
Where do you guys fit into the picture?
Well, just recently, in fact, I'm here this week at CSCMP to release our Carbon Emissions Manager platform, developed in partnership with our customer AbbVie, the global pharmaceutical organization. We have put together a product that is going out and is aggregating that data, all that third-party data you talked about, all the carrier data that we're going out and sourcing that. We're harmonizing it into a Snowflake data lake, and then we're being able to deliver that back to the enterprise, both in an aggregated form for that broader ESG reporting, and also on the drill down forms to allow those individual procurement managers and logistics managers to be able to make good day-to-day, moment-by-moment decisions across service, cost, and now sustainability. They can actually see the impact of the decisions they're making.
Sounds like a big step forward. Josh, thank you so much for sharing your insights on the whole issue of reducing and eliminating carbon emissions in the supply chain. Thanks very much.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is great.
I have been speaking with Josh Bouk of Trax Technologies. Thank you very much for watching.